take notes if you want to. This is not testable. This is just for you. So you can see the advantage of studying Old Testament. And now that you've studied a little bit, what we're going to share and read is going to be kind of fun, because it's going to make a lot more sense than it would have 3 months ago. And that's all I want to do is share things with you. Not a lot, just a few little things so you can kind of see it. What I'd like to do is light a spark under you so you see the importance of reading the Old Testament scriptures. Now that you have an understanding of the geography, you know the flow of it. It is so stinking cool, guys. It is so fun. It is so fun to study, to read and to study the Old Testament. So I want to encourage you, when you read it, have a notebook out and just jot down little things that pop up. And I'm here to tell you, they're all going to be connected. It's the most amazing thing. Things that we don't even think about connect. They just connect. It is crazy. So that's all we're going to do here, is just talk about some fun stuff. Last week, you remember, we talked about Shechem. Remember, we talked about Shechem being the place where Simeon and Levi massacred the Shechemites. Remember, because the prince of Shechem had raped Dinah. And then when the children of Israel come back into the promised land, God says, make certain you destroy all these Canaanites. And of all the places to go, as soon as possible, Joshua takes the children of Israel to Shechem, the place where they destroyed the Canaanites ahead of God's time. But now they go there and they make this vow saying, okay, you brought us to the promised land, we're going to follow the Lord. And they do it there at Shechem. And they read the curses out of Genesis 28 on Mount Ebal. And they read the blessings out of Deuteronomy 28 on Mount Gerizim. Then later on in chapter 24, remember, that's where Joshua, towards the end of his life, he brings all the tribes back together to Shechem. And he says, okay, guys, we need to really make a decision right now. God has given us the land. I'm getting ready to go see him. You got to decide, what are you going to do? Are you going to follow the Baals? Or are you going to follow the Lord? He says, I don't know what you're going to do, but as for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. He says that at Shechem, at that very same place, as they rededicate that covenant pledge, if you will, to God, that they're going to follow him. Well, that's the end of Joshua. The book of Judges comes along, they just walk away from that whole thing. They just walk away from it. They make the pledge, but they walk away. And that is something we want to remember. People are always, even believers, we're so quick to make a vow what we're going to do, are we not? God, I'm going to read the word first of the year. How many vows are broken from the first of the year? I'm going to read the word every day, Lord, every day. And by March, it's long forgotten. You know how that goes. I'm going to be in church every service. I'm going to be here for at least 2 weeks. You know how that goes. It's crazy. We make these vows. We don't keep them. The book of Ecclesiastes, Solomon says it's better not to make a vow than to make a vow and break it. Don't break the vow. There's consequences to broken vows of every level. There's consequences to broken vows. Well, we get in the book of Judges, and, you know, Connie and I are in Judges right now. We just finished Judges 3 up today. And in Judges, we see now where everyone is starting to do what's right in their own eyes. And they're starting to follow the Baals. And they start that cycle. Remember in the book of Judges, the cycle where they drift into sin as they drift away from the Lord. And then the Lord brings up somebody to put them under servitude. And then after a number of years, oftentimes, sometimes 15, 16 years, they would rather, I can do this, rather than just crying out to God for help. But eventually they cry out to God, and he raises up a judge. We call that the salvation part. Or supplication part. They cry out to God, supplication. He brings up the judge, and there's the salvation part. So we see that wheel going through the book of Judges over and over and over. One of the things we didn't talk about in Judges, but I want to talk about it because as we study the book of Joshua, the book of Judges, as we study all these, Tom, if you could help our guest right now, as we study all these books, as we study them, we see that what they're doing is they're giving background, all this background to the throne of Israel. And we're going to see background in Joshua and Judges and Ruth for the kingship of David, as well as for Saul. So we see Saul and David's kingdoms being the foundation being laid for king being the first Saul of Israel, and David for being the first true king of Israel. The foundation and a lot of the players show up in the book of Joshua and Judges. So Joshua and Judges is really key, as is Ruth, to understanding the kingdoms. So that's why it's important to study that. A lot of times people read it and they just see it as, hi guys, thanks for coming in. Thanks for coming in. This is a class, we're having a class here. So it's a lecture for a class. Glad you're here. So we're just kind of talking. You'll have questions. We're just talking, but glad you're here. This is cool. Thanks for being here. But so when you study Joshua and Judges, we want to study it more so than just, there's the map, there's a cool story of taking Jericho, here's a study of taking Ai, oh, here's this cycle in Judges. That's all important. But there is so much more. So much more. If you've ever been hooked on a soap opera, I know we don't want to admit it, but if you ever have been, I was in the early 80s, a soap opera called General Hospital. The old Luke and Laura, that was right in my time. In fact, I was much skinnier. I was a runner then, believe it or not. I'd run 6 miles 3 times a week. And I was very skinny, and I had the perm with the mustache goatee and all this. And people through them say, you look like Luke. So I took that as a compliment. Oh, cool, check it out. But at any rate, I got into that, so I would get home and have my lunch plan so I could see General Hospital, you know. I did that, and I was a Christian too. That's just so sad. That's what happens when you don't study. You just get caught in weird stuff. But anyway, that's what I did. So I was there, and but you know how it is with a soap opera or a modern day soap opera today, like 24 or one of those types of series things. What is it now? Empire, those types of things. Which one? The Walking Dead? Okay, it sounds gross, I don't know, but okay. But at any rate, so those types of things, when you see it and you watch it every week, it makes sense. But if you just come in on a 24 episode season and you come in on episode 16 and no one's there to tell you what's going on, you're sort of like, I kind of get it. And you want to see the next episode. It's pretty interesting, but you don't get it the closing episode. It's him. Where did he come from? Well, that was episode 4. That's what the Old Testament is like. And if we jump in and try and study the kings, we can study David, but we haven't studied Ruth. We miss out on a lot of David. And if we jump into 2 Samuel and study David, well, we'll look at that. I'll save that for later. But there's all these things that all this plays together. So it's fun reading it if you just jot down as you're reading the highlights of the book that might seem insignificant at first. And then as you keep reading and you get to episode 17, that little detail in episode 4 blows your mind. You go, whoa, it makes sense now. That's Old Testament. And that's why people get so confused in the Old Testament. They go, I don't get it. Because we typically start in Genesis. We'll read all of Genesis. We get halfway through Exodus and we quit. We skip Leviticus. We might pick up a few things on Numbers because that's pretty cool. Deuteronomy. We get through Deuteronomy. We get to Joshua. That's fun stuff. Judges is kind of rough. It's like, well, there's a lot of killing going on. That's kind of crazy. He took that knife and he stuck it all into Ehud, all the way up, or into Eglon, all the way up through the handle. Are you serious? That's just nasty. So we'll skip through that. We read Ruth. Well, that's kind of sappy, love story, whatever. And then the genealogy and whatever. And we get into 1 Samuel, and okay, they're dealing with Samuel's birth. And here I am, Lord. And Eli's kind of another fat guy. What's with these fat guys up there? And we watch that, and we see all this stuff, and we see that, and it's just like whatever. And oh, here's the good part. Here's David, Saul, whatever. He doesn't count. Let's go to David, and now it's fun. And then so much of it we miss because we have not studied episodes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, so we can really enjoy episode 11, you know. So I want to encourage you to read it slowly. Just read it. Take notes. You're going to love it if you do. We're not going to spend a lot of time. I don't want to hold you with all these things, but I'm going to give you a couple of them just so you can see. If you don't have your Bible with you, grab one around you because we're going to read quite a little bit tonight so you can see where this fits. Now, when we were in Judges, we were doing the cyclical studies, right? All the judges and all. How many judges were there in the book of Judges? We had 6 that we studied, but how many were there? 13. 13, the number of rebellion. And the whole book of Judges is God's people rebelling. Easy way to remember it. But there are 6 main storylines, and then there were 7 that were just kind of thrown in a chapter or 2 here and there. But we want to go to the book of Judges that doesn't really cover the judges. This covers something really crazy. And that's in chapter 19. We're not going to read all of chapter 19. I'm just going to tell you a real quick story. There's a Levite. And this Levite, now if you're a Levite, are you godly or ungodly? Godly. You would think, wouldn't you? Yep. But remember, it's in the book of Judges when everyone's doing what's right in his own eyes. But he's still a Levite. This Levite's got a concubine, and we should say at that point, say, what? Go ahead and say that. Say, what? Yeah, so this Levite's got a concubine. There you go. There you go, because Levites are supposed to have concubines? What's going on? He's not a concubine. What? A concubine? But in the time of Judges, everyone's doing what's right in his own eyes. So all of a sudden, we're seeing some godly people taking their morality based on the culture of its time rather than on the Word of God. So what we're doing in our country is nothing new. It goes on and on and on and on and on. So here's this Levite. Well, he's just passing on through, and he's looking for a place to stay with his concubine and his father-in-law, which is interesting. But he's doing that, and he goes to these cities that are not the best of cities. They're Canaanite cities. I don't want to stay there. I can't trust that. I don't want to stay there. I can't trust that. Oh, I'm coming to Gibeah. Keep that in mind, Gibeah.
He was staying in Ephraim, and I know right where that is.
There you go. Ephraim's that whole tribe. You know right where that is. So he's in Ephraim, and he's going to a town. He's going from town to town, Canaanite town to Canaanite town. It's dark, but he doesn't want to stay in these Canaanite towns. Who knows what's going to happen there? So check this out. See if this sounds familiar. He goes to the town of Gibeah. And he goes to Gibeah, and he's going to stay in the town square. Put your hand up if it starts to sound familiar. He's going to stay in this, put it up, keep it up once you know, if it sounds familiar. Put your hand up, just hold it up. So he's going to stay in the town square, these 3. This Levite and his concubine and his father-in-law. And a man comes up to him and says, no, you shouldn't stay in the town square. That's not a good idea. Does it sound familiar to anybody yet? Put a hand up if it sounds familiar. And he says, you come home with me. So he goes home with them, and guess what the men of Gibeah, this good Jewish town, right? Not a Canaanite town, in Ephraim, and he actually goes into Benjamin is where he's at now. So he's in Benjamin. He's from Ephraim. He goes into Benjamin. He's trying to find a place to stay. So he's in Gibeah of Benjamin, and he's there, and guess what happens? The men of the city come to this old man's house, and he says, send out those men that were here. We want to know them. Sound familiar yet?
Yeah, a lot.
So just put your hand up if it sounds familiar. Starting to sound familiar? And he says, no, you can't be with these guys. They want to know them sexually. You can't do that with these guys. These are my guests. You can't do that. He says, here, take her. Have fun with her. All night long. Don't worry about it. Sodom. Remember Lot, Sodom, the angels coming in? The same thing takes place here in Gibeah of Benjamin. This Ephraimite Levite going through Benjamin. So there he is now, and he gets up in the morning. It's crazy. He gets up in the morning. That's where we'll pick up. It's unbelievable. Unbelievable. Let's pick up in, where do we pick it up? It's just so crazy. I don't even know where we pick it up. It's just nuts. It's nuts. Okay, let's go to verse 27 of chapter 19. We're going to read for a while. Let's go to 22. I told you this story, but I want you to see the story. Let's go to 22 of 19. As they were enjoying themselves, suddenly certain men of the city, perverted men. Now, perverted men is what the Bible refers to when he refers to homosexuals. Perversion, homosexuality is considered a perversion in the Word of God, and perverted men is what the Bible uses to refer to homosexuals. He says, perverted men surrounded the house and beat on the door. Sounds familiar? They spoke to the master of the house, that old man, saying, bring out the man who came to your house that we may know him carnally. But the man, the master of the house, went out to him and said, no, my brethren. My brethren? Really? My brethren, I beg you, do not act so wickedly. Seeing this man has come into my house, do not commit this outrage. Sounds familiar, does it not? Look, here is my virgin daughter, and here is the man's concubine, his daughter and the concubine. Let me bring them out now. Humble them. Do with them as you please, but to this man do not do such a vile thing. But the men would not heed him. So the man took his concubine and brought her out to them, and they knew her and abused her all night until morning. And when the day began to break, they let her go. Then the woman came as the day was dawning and fell down at the door of the man's house where her master was till it was light. When her master arose in the morning, opened the doors of the house, he went on his way. There was his concubine, fallen at the door of the house with her hands on the threshold. And he said to her, get up, let's go. Unbelievable. This Levite attitude here. But there was no answer. So the man lifted her onto the donkey, and the man got up and went to his place. When he entered his house, when he got home, he took a knife. She was dead. He took a knife, he laid hold of his concubine, and he cut her up into 12 pieces, limb by limb. And he took a piece of her and sent her throughout all the territory of Israel, one piece of this concubine to each of the tribes of Israel. Hello?
Wow.
Has anybody ever heard this before?
Oh, yeah.
Isn't that something?
Wow.
Can you imagine we teach Judges on Sunday morning?
Wow.
Come to church, man, and this is what we'll be teaching.
Yes.
Limb by limb, he sent throughout all the territory of Israel. So it was that all who saw it said, no such deed has been done or seen from the day that the children of Israel came up from the land of Egypt until this day. Consider it, confer, and speak up. He says, look at this. Here's an arm of my concubine. Look what they did to her. They raped her all night and killed her. Look at. Here's a leg of my concubine. Look what they did to her. Here's her head. Look what they did to her. And it stirred. So all the children of Israel came out from Dan. Do you remember where Dan is now? The city of Dan? James, remember where that is? North or south?
North.
Isn't that something? Bam, right now. Did you know that last year?
No.
Isn't that something? Do you see how it's going to start helping you read this stuff? Now, we should have put Beersheba. We'll put Beersheba on our next map. Beersheba is the southernmost city of Judah, the southernmost major city. So from the northern city to the southern city. So from the north to the south. So all, there's that word all. The children of Israel came out from Dan to Beersheba, as well as from when we go to Israel, by the way, and I'm not trying to sound goofy, it happens. When you go to Israel, they pronounce Beersheba as Beersheba. So that's what you always hear. Beersheba, it's a major city today. Beersheba, going down to Beersheba. This trip, we went through Beersheba. If you remember those who did the extension, we came from Eilat, going up to the airport, we went through Beersheba. That was that desert city, and there was Beersheba. I was all excited. Baby, there's Beersheba. But we didn't mention, we said, there it is, and that was it. But that's a major city down there. But they pronounce it Beersheba, even though it's got a B there. It's just the Hebrew pronunciation, I guess. So Beersheba, from Dan to Beersheba, as well as from the land of Gilead. That's across. Remember we talked about Gilead being across the Jordan River in the area of Gad? And the congregation gathered together as one man before the Lord. This is important. Notice where they gather, at Mizpah. So they all gather at Mizpah. This is the place where Aaron gave his blessing back in the book of Numbers, I guess, where he says, the Lord be with you and bless you, raise up his face upon you and give you his peace, his countenance upon you, give you his peace. It's called the Mizpah blessing. So this is at Mizpah. So they all come together at Mizpah. Keep Mizpah in mind because it's going to show up here in a second. And the leaders of all the people, all the tribes of Israel, presented themselves in the assembly of the people of God, 400,000 foot soldiers who drew the sword. Now the children of Benjamin heard that the children of Israel had gone up to Mizpah. So here sits Benjamin. There at Gibeah in Benjamin, this took place. Benjaminites, we won't talk about it now, I don't think it's in this portion, but Benjamites were known to be unbelievable with their sling. They were fantastic with their slings. Benjamites, for the most part, were left-handed. Interesting. So we got left-handed Benjamites, typically. Not always, but typically. So, but they were warriors. They were known to be fierce. Fierce warriors, Benjamites. So you got the Benjamites. And all of Israel, 400,000 foot soldiers gather together and say, Benjamin, you're doing what? You're acting like Sodom in our midst? Are you kidding me? You've gone too far. You've gone too far. So they're gathering. Then the children of Israel said, tell us, how did this wicked deed happen? So the Levite, the husband of the woman who was murdered, answered and said, my concubine and I went into Gibeah, keep in mind Gibeah of Benjamin, which belongs to Benjamin, to spend the night. And the men of Gibeah rose against me, surrounded the house at night because of me. They intended to kill me, but instead they ravished my concubine so that she died. So I took hold of my concubine, cut her in pieces, sent her throughout all the territory of the inheritance of Israel, because I committed lewdness and outrage in Israel. Look, all of you are children of Israel. Give your advice and counsel here and now. Do you get it? Do you see what's going on here? So they talk. We won't go much about any further in this for now, but it says, well, let's go ahead. So all the people arose as one man, saying, none of us will go back to his home, nor shall anybody turn back to his house. But now this is the thing which we will do to Gibeah. We're going to go up against it by lot. We're going to take 10 men out of every 100 throughout all the tribes of Israel, 100 of every 1,000, 10% basically. And we're going to go there and we're going to destroy Gibeah. This is it. This cannot happen in this land. Do you see that? That's what's going on here. Then as we go further, we get to verse 32. Let's just skim on down. They have this war, and they're fighting day after day. At first, Benjamin wins. They're good warriors, man, and they're fighting on they got a home field advantage. They're going for it. But Israel has some loss, but they keep on regathering and going into it, going on, and they are steaming now. This is getting very serious. We have God's people fighting each other and hurting each other. And we get to verse 32. And the children of Benjamin said, they're defeated before us at the first. What Israel does, what we skipped over, is they pull an AI defense, AI military plan. Remember, you have people hiding in bushes or in the background, and you go up to fight, and then you turn and run, and they come out of the city, and then that's what they do. They do that to the Benjamites here at Gibeah. So it says, and they said, the children of Benjamin said, they are defeated before us as at the first. But the children of Israel said, let's flee and draw them away from the city to the highway. So all the men of Israel rose from their place, put themselves in battle array at Baal Tamar. Then Israel's men in ambush burst forth in their position in the plain of Geba. And 10,000 select men. This would be like their special forces, thanks. The special forces from all Israel came against Gibeah, and the battle was fierce. But the Benjamites did not know that disaster was upon them. Why? Because the Lord defeated Benjamin before Israel. And the children of Israel destroyed that day 25,100 Benjamites. All these drew the sword. So the children of Benjamin, it says here. Now let's skip down. Let's go to 44. And 18,000 men of Benjamin fell. All these were men of valor. They turned towards the wilderness to the rock of Rimmon. Keep that in mind. They're going to the rock of Rimmon. And they cut down 5,000 of them on the highways. Then they pursued them relentlessly up to Gedam and killed 2,000 of them. So all who fell of Benjamin that day were 25,000 men who drew the sword. All these were men of valor. But 600, only 600 men turned and fled toward the wilderness to the rock of Rimmon. And they stayed at the rock of Rimmon for 4 months. Out of all the only 600 men survived this massacre. 600 men. Notice, and the men of Israel turned back against the children of Benjamin, struck them down with the edge of the sword from every city, men and beasts, all who were found. They also set fire to all the cities they came to. In other words, the tribe of Benjamin is almost completely extinguished. There's 600 men left, and they've destroyed all the women and children and beasts and cities. We got 600 Benjamites left on the rock of Rimmon out there. That's it. That's it. Benjamin is gone. They took a vow. We skipped it, but you can go back and read it. When they gathered together at Mizpah, they said, well, we'll read it, but they tell us about it here in chapter 21. Take a look at this. Now the men of Israel had sworn an oath at Mizpah, here it is, saying, none of us shall give his daughter to Benjamite as a wife. But they killed all the Benjamite women. So you got 600 men and no women. And all of Israel said, they took a vow, we're not going to give any of our daughters to the Benjamites. We got a problem. Benjamin's going down. Then the people came to the house of God and remained there before God until evening. They lifted up their voices and they wept bitterly. I love this picture. We see God's people coming together and weeping over the devastation of another brother who has been destroyed in sin. And they came down hard on him. They came down hard. How many times have we seen that in Christianity? Where brothers in sin, and instead of restoring the spirit of gentleness, they come down hard and they destroy him, almost destroy him. But now they come and go, oh my goodness, oh Lord God, they say of Israel, why has this come to pass in Israel that today there should be no one, there will be a tribe missing in Israel? So it was on the next morning that the people rose early and built an altar there and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. This, believe it or not, guys, is extremely important to understand the reign of Saul, what we're going to come into right now. Check this out. Who is there among all the tribes of Israel who did not come up with the assembly to the Lord? They said, of all the tribes, did anybody not come up to Mizpah and take that oath that we're not going to give our daughters? We make an oath, we can't go against it. Did anybody not show up? So they take a look. For they had made a great oath concerning anyone who did not come up to the Lord at Mizpah, saying, he shall surely be put to death. So if you don't come up to Mizpah, we're going to kill you. Did anybody not come up to Mizpah? And the children of Israel grieved for Benjamin, their brother, and said, one tribe is cut off from Israel today. What shall we do for the wives, for those who remain? Seeing we have sworn by the Lord that we shall not give them our daughters as wives. They said, what one is there from the tribes of Israel? Do not come up to Mizpah to the Lord. And then, in fact, no one had come up to the camp, from Jabesh. Not the Jabesh on the western side of the Jordan, but the Jabesh town over in Gilead. Jabesh Gilead. Nobody had come up from Jabesh Gilead to the assembly. For when the people were counted, indeed, not one of the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead was there. They were all called to show up. They didn't. So the congregation sent out there 12,000 of their most valiant men, more special forces. And they commanded them, saying, go up and strike and kill the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead with the edge of the sword, including all the women and children. Destroy them. They were not part of this. They're out. And this is the thing that you shall do. You will utterly destroy every male of Jabesh Gilead, every woman who has known a man intimately. So they found among the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead 400 young virgins who had not known a man intimately yet. And they brought them to the camp at Shiloh. You know where Shiloh is, right? That was where the very presence of God was at this time, in Shiloh, which is in the land of Canaan. So they went back across the Jordan River with 400 virgin Jabesh Gileadites. Now there's 600 men, they're still short, and they do a thing at Shiloh where the virgins would go out and pick their flowers in the field and all this. And without reading the rest of the story, it's interesting, you can read it later on if you'd like, but they say, okay, we're still short some women. So Benjamites that don't have the 400 Jabesh Gileadites for wives, those 200 that are left out, go to Shiloh during this feast, hide in the fields. And when these virgin women come out, capture one of them for yourself, take him home, and it's yours. So these gals are out there, and these Benjamites are taking them left and right. Well, the men of Shiloh go, wait a minute, that's my girl, what's the matter with you? All of Israel comes up and says, wait a minute. You made a vow not to give your daughter to a Benjamite. You didn't. She was captured by a Benjamite. Now go home or I'll have to kill you. It's cool. So that was it. And that's how the Benjamites get their population back. So 2/3 of the Benjamites are direct descendants of the women of Jabesh Gilead. So going forward now, the children, 2/3 of the children are going to be Benjamite/Jabesh Gileadites. Do you see that? So Benjamin and Jabesh Gilead have a strong tie. Now let's turn over into 1 Samuel chapter 10. The children of Israel asking for a king. We want a king like the other nations. We want a king like the other nations. We want a king just like the other nations, remember. We get into chapter 10, verse 17. They want a king. Samuel has anointed Saul, but now he's going to go public. Then Samuel called the people together to the Lord at where? Isn't that something? The same place that they called them together, chapter 10 of 1 Samuel, verse 17. But isn't that something? Isn't that something? The same place where they gathered when they were fighting Benjamin, now this king who is one generation before, remember from Ruth, then God would have had him. This is the king they wanted. He raises it up from the tribe that had rebelled against all of Israel. He raises it up from Benjamin, and he gathers everybody. Samuel gathers everybody. It's like at Mizpah. So he calls them all together at Mizpah. He says to the children of Israel, thus says the Lord God, I brought you up, Israel, out of Egypt, delivered you from the hand of the Egyptians, from the land of all the kingdoms, from those who oppressed you. But you have today rejected your God, who himself saved you from all your adversaries and tribulations. And you have said to him, no, set a king over us. Now therefore present yourselves before the Lord by your tribes and by your clans. And when Samuel had caused all the tribes of Israel to come near, the tribe of Benjamin was chosen. When he had caused the tribe of Benjamin to come near by their families, the family of Matri was chosen, and Saul the son of Kish was chosen. But when they sought him, they couldn't find him. Therefore they inquired of the Lord, has the man come here yet? And the Lord said, there he is. He's hiding over there by the equipment. He's hiding back over there by the chariot. He's over there. So they ran and they brought him from there. And when he stood among the people, he was taller than any of the people from his shoulders upward. An obvious leader, tall guy. Obviously the king. Samuel said to all the people, do you see him whom the Lord has chosen, that there is none like him among the people? And the people said, long live the king. Then Samuel explained to the people the behavior of royalty and wrote it in a book and laid it up before the Lord. And Samuel sent all the people away, every man to his house. And Saul went to his house where? Isn't that something? In Gibeah of Benjamin. The very city where we just read what happened in Judges not much prior to this. And valiant men went with him, whose hearts God had touched, but some rebel says, how can this man save us? So they despised him and brought him no presents, but he held his peace. Then Nahash, the Ammonite, came up and encamped against where? What? Now, if we haven't read Judges, this account that we go, I don't want to read that, we're not going to see the connection here. Saul, the Benjamite, is home now at Gibeah, and the Ammonites go and camp against Jabesh Gilead that obviously has been rebuilt. Do you think there might be a tie between Saul in Gibeah and Jabesh Gilead? It was the Jabesh Gilead women who were brought to Gibeah to repopulate Benjamin. And now, this is family on the other side of the Jordan all of a sudden. So now they come up of all the places. Ammonites, that was about the worst city in the world to go up against on that side of the river, because you're talking about the new king's fam. And all the men of Jabesh said to Nahash, make a covenant with us. We'll serve you. Calm down. And Nahash the Ammonite answered and says, on this condition I'll make a covenant with you, that I may put out all your right eyes. Just let me pluck out your right eye. You're good. Because without a right eye, you're not going to be able to shoot a bow. You're going to have no depth perception to fight. You're pretty much incapacitated as a warrior out there. So just give me a basket full of your right eyes. We're good. Then the elders of Jabesh said to him, wait, hold off for a week, that we may send messengers to all the territory of Israel, and then, if there's no one to save us, then we'll come out to you and you can have our eyes. So the messengers came to Gibeah of Saul, told the news in the hearing of the people. All the people lifted up their voices and wept. Now there was Saul. They're all weeping. Why are they so weeping? Because that's family. And they're weeping. Oh my goodness, this is horrible. And here comes Saul, coming behind the herd that was in the field. And Saul said, what troubles the people that they're weeping? And they told him the words of the men of Jabesh. Then the Spirit of God came upon Saul when he heard the news, and his anger was greatly aroused. He took a yoke of oxen, he cut them in pieces, and sent them throughout all the territory of Israel by the hands of messengers. Whoever does not go out with Saul and Samuel to battle, it'll be done to his oxen too. It worked against the Benjamites. Let's do it again. We'll do it oxen this time. Do you see the similarities here? Do you see how the story of Saul sits right on top of this Levite there in Gibeah from the book of Judges? Do you see it?
Yes.
So it's episode 3, foreshadowing of episode 8. Do you see how that works together?
Yes.
The whole Old Testament, guys, is like this. So if you read this without reading that little bit in Judges, you go, oh, that's just nasty. I don't want to read it. Cutting up a cut. No, let's skip ahead. No, read it. Take notes. Every verse is there for a reason. But if you have that background and you read this, you're going, whoa. And it ties in, but it gets even crazier. Check this out. In the fear of the Lord, how far am I going? To verse 14. And the fear of the Lord fell on the people, And they came out with one consent. Then he numbered them in Bezek. The children of Israel were 300,000, the men of Judah 30,000. And they said to the messengers who came, thus you shall say to the men of Jabesh Gilead, tomorrow, by the time the sun is hot, you're going to have help. The messengers came and reported to the men of Jabesh, and they were glad, I bet. Tomorrow we will come out to you. And therefore the men of Jabesh said to these Ammonites, tomorrow we're going to come out to you. And you can do with us whatever seems good to you. So it was on the next day that Saul put the people in 3 companies, and they came in the midst of the camp in the morning watch, and they killed Ammonites until the heat of the day. And it happened that those who survived were scattered, so that no 2 of them were left together. Then the people said to Samuel, who is he who said, shall Saul reign over us? They questioned his leadership. Bring the men. We're going to kill them too. So I said, how dare you question Saul's leadership? Look what he just did. But Saul said, no. No one's going to be put to death this day, for today the Lord has accomplished salvation in Israel. Then Samuel said to the people, come, let us go to Gilgal and renew the kingdom there. So all the people went to Gilgal, and they made Saul king before the Lord in Gilgal. There they made sacrifice of peace offerings before the Lord, and there Saul and all of his men of Israel rejoiced greatly. So then it goes on and talks about his coronation. Then we see the mistakes that Saul made. We've talked about that in our overview and all. But what we want to look at now is 1 Samuel 31. 1 Samuel talks about Saul chasing down David. He gets into battle at the end of the chapter here with the Philistines. Chapter 31 is a horrible chapter as far as Saul's story goes. It's bad news, man. But they die. And in verse 7, Saul and his sons are all killed in battle with the Philistines. But verse 7, and when the men of Israel, who were on the other side of the valley, and those who were on the other side of the Jordan, saw that the men of Israel had fled, and that Saul and his sons were dead, they forsook the cities and fled, and the Philistines came and dwelt in them. So it happened the next day when the Philistines came to strip the slain, they found Saul and his 3 sons, including Jonathan, fallen there on Mount Gilboa. And they cut off his head. They stripped him of his armor. They sent word throughout the land of the Philistines to proclaim it in the temple of their idols and among the people. Then they put his armor in the temple of the Ashtoreths, and they fastened his body to the wall of Bet-Shan. Now, Bet-Shan is the New Testament Bet-Shean. Remember Bet-Shean, those who went to Israel? That was that Greek ruins, those big ruins. We walked through the Roman ruins of everything. Remember, before we went to Sachni, that kind of Garden of Eden swimming pool area where we chilled with the picnic lunch and all. But we had the amphitheater and all the ruins. It was the biggest ruins we saw in all of Israel. When we were there, we pointed to that hill way in the back, and we said that is the ancient tell of the Old Testament Bet-Shean. Remember those steps that were going all the way up, like 700 steps, and people, David and Monica probably, saying, can we climb those steps? I go, no, there's nothing to see up there, but there's 700 steps straight up. It's crazy. But that's ancient Bet-Shean. And underneath that tell, that was the wall. Did you go up there, Monica, or no?
No, he took off before.
David went up there? Yeah. I know someone went up there. That's David. I went up there one time, and there's nothing up there. But it's up there. But, yeah, that's it. That's the tree that Judas got hung on in the movie, but it wasn't it, but it's just for the movie. That's right. But underneath that tell are these walls of Bet-Shean. Remember we said it's either on that part of Manasseh or maybe northern Ephraim. In the other room we said, just remember Bet-Shean is right there. It's on the western side of the Jordan River. So that's where he is hung. But now take a look at verse 11. Now when the inhabitants of who? Jabesh Gilead, the ones that Saul rescued, the ones that the women were taken and intermarried with the Benjamites, Saul's family. When the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead heard what the Philistines had done to Saul, all the valiant men from Jabesh Gilead arose, traveled all night, went across the Jordan River, took the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons from the wall of Bet-Shean. They risked their lives with the Philistines to get Saul and his sons. And they came back to Jabesh, the one in Gilead, and they burned them there. Then they took their bones and buried them under the tamarisk tree at Jabesh, and they fasted 7 days. So when you read this, well, why did Jabesh Gilead do it? Now you understand why. The inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead. Do you see how it all fits together? Do you see that? That is Old Testament. So we just know the flow. But if you go back and read it, oh man, it's really good. You're not going to find a book that does this for you. I've been privileged to study Old Testament almost 40 years now. That's when I first started studying the scriptures, Old Testament. And I've had 40 years of study. So as you study, you get this. I wish they had books that would track this for you because it's really cool. But if you read it, just read it and write it down. You'll hear that name. Wait, Jabesh Gilead, and you can go back and trace it back there. Whoa, whoa. What? Look at this. Do you see how it works? Now, do you see how Saul died? Verse 4 of chapter 31, he's been hit by the archers. And in verse 4 in Mount Gilboa, Saul said to his armor bearer, draw your sword and thrust me through with it, lest these uncircumcised men, remember that's the biggest insult you can give, come and thrust me through and abuse me. But his armor bearer, he wouldn't. He was greatly afraid. That's like having the Secret Service take out the president. I'm not taking you out. Therefore Saul took a sword and he fell on it. And when his armor bearer saw that Saul was dead, he also fell on the sword, and he died with him. So Saul's 3 sons, his armor bearer, and all his men died together that same day. Do you see that? They all died. Chapter 1 of 2 Samuel. And we're almost done here, guys. Bear with me. Now it came to pass after the death of Saul, David had returned from the slaughter of the Amalekites. David had stayed 2 days in Ziklag. On the 3rd day, it happened that a man came into Saul's camp. From Saul's camp came with his clothes torn, dust on his head. So he's grieving. He came to David. He fell on the ground and prostrated himself. And David said, where have you come from? He said, I've escaped from the camp of Israel. How did the battle go? Tell me. And he says, the people have fled from the battle. Many of the people have fallen and are dead. And Saul and Jonathan's sons are dead also. And David said to the young man who came to the camp, how do you know that Saul and Jonathan's son are dead? And the young man said, as I happened by chance to be on Mount Gilboa, there was Saul leaning on his spear, and indeed the chariots and horsemen followed hard after him. He looked behind him, he saw me, he said, he called me and he says, here I am. And he said to me, who are you? And he answered and he says, I am a what now? Amalekite. Remember the Amalekites? That's who Saul was supposed to kill, all of them. Remember that? Remember the Amalekites in Exodus 17 when Moses had his hand up, the battle of the Amalekites, his hands were up. Joshua would win the battle, hands were down. Amalekites won the battle, remember? And it was Samuel said to Saul, go kill all those Amalekites. And he didn't. Remember, he kept Agag alive, and he kept a lot of the better ones alive and all. Well, here's an Amalekite. This Amalekite is supposed to have been dead. Saul's supposed to kill this guy. But he didn't. And now, who are you? I'm an Amalekite. And he said to me, please stand over me and kill me. For anguish has come upon me, but my life still remains in me. So I stood over him, I killed Saul, because I was sure he could not live after he had fallen. And I took the crown that was on his head, and the bracelet was on his arm, and I have brought them here to me. We got 2 accounts of Saul dying. Chapter 31 says Saul fell on his own sword and died. And here we have an account of an eyewitness who said, I killed him. And here's his crown. So now we got a choice. We got to believe one or the other. We can believe the word of God in chapter 31, or we can believe the testimony of an Amalekite recorded in chapter 1 of 2 Samuel. Your choice. David has this guy killed immediately. But if we look at the Amalekites, remember they took off the weak stragglers in the book of Exodus? Look up Amalekites, and it's interesting. I was going to do my doctorate thesis on the Amalekites. But the hard part is when you do a thesis, it's got to be a work that no one's ever done. And I had done a ton of work on it. And I went to Dr. Collins. I said, I'm going to do it on the Amalekites. And he goes, what part of them? I said, what do you mean part of the Amalekites? Type of the flesh. He pulled out this book, and there's about a 300-page thesis on the Amalekites. I'm like, so I know a lot about the Amalekites, guys. I even went to the Sinai Peninsula where the battle took place. I walked Rephidim. That's me all part of my thesis. Man, I had this thing down. The Amalekites were known as grave robbers, or battlefield robbers. They would go to the bodies after the battle and rob the bodies. They were known for that. They were Amalekites. And I find it so interesting that the Amalekites, it was an Amalekite who shows up with the crown and bracelet from Saul. Remember they cut off his head? He got the crown. But I find it interesting that the Amalekites in Scripture are a type of the flesh. And Saul was supposed to kill the Amalekites, and he didn't. And I can't help but think of James chapter 1. where it says if we, resist temptation, we'll receive the crown. But if we don't kill our flesh, we'll get to heaven. But we could lose the crown that God has for us. Saul's crown was taken by the Amalekite after he died. I find that so interesting. So we have this whole thing with Saul and the Jabesh Gileadites and his death, and the Jabesh Gileadites coming and taking his body and all. It just goes, good stuff. And it goes on and on and on. In closing, we won't go through it because of time, but there is an interesting thing, just a little bit, because the life of David is really fantastic. It's a wonderful study. But if you have not read Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1 Samuel, and you look at the kingship of David, I'm going to teach on David, you're going to miss so much by not studying what led up to it. Here's an example how it works. If you look at the life of David, we see, I got the verse, I looked up the verse, that's what I was doing on my phone up here before we started. I was going to look up the verse when Bradley was here and I talked with him instead. But in 2 Samuel, don't have to look it up, but just so you know, in chapter 23, verse 34, and in 2 Samuel 15, those two sections, now we just walk away from that. But David has got an advisor. He's his number one counselor. His name is Ahithophel. And Ahithophel gives David his counsel. He's an awesome counselor. You know the story of David probably, where he Bathsheba, and he has Uriah the Hittite assassinate her husband and takes her for the wife. You know the whole story. And the little baby dies, and then he makes her his queen, and they have another little baby named Solomon. He becomes the next king and all. But David's got all these other kids. And one of his kids is a guy named Absalom. And Absalom rears up against David and tries to take David's throne. Sits at the gate after he'd killed Amnon and all. Remember, another one of David's sons, Absalom did, and David and him were on speaking terms, and it gets somewhat healed. He comes back to Jerusalem, and he's got to just kind of be quiet and behave himself in Jerusalem, and David's still on the throne. Absalom goes to the gate of the city. And his people are coming in, so why are you here to see the king? Well, if I were the king, you wouldn't be in that situation. Another one comes in. You here to see my dad, David? Yeah, I got to. If I were the king, this would never happen. He was like a politician. And there he was doing this. And he was just doing this and doing this. They call it playing the Absalom game. You see it in churches sometimes, where people will come in and say, well, if I was the head of that ministry, that would never happen. Whether it's a women's ministry, children's ministry, the pastor, people will come in and try and do that from time. It's the Absalom game. Well, Ahithophel is David's counselor. And as we read the story of David and Absalom, Absalom is going to fight David. And David goes, I'm not killing no, that's my boy. I will leave. And David leaves, and his people follow him. Ahithophel, his main counselor, all these years, jumps ship. And he goes to Absalom. He says, Absalom, what you need to do is you need to go into David's concubines publicly that he left behind, and that'll be your way of proclaiming that you're the king. And David is out there now. He's on the run. Go get him now. Go get him. Just go get him, take him out, and you've got this. I know him. Another advisor comes and says, no. David had sent him to go against Ahithophel's counsel, He says, no, Absalom, David's a warrior. You're not. He's like a caged animal right now. You go out there, now he's going to destroy you guys. You need to get this thing put together and planned. Giving David time to go because David is in trouble out there. And Absalom listens to Ahithophel. Ahithophel hears that he doesn't take his counsel. He knows, oh man, you're a dead man, Absalom. David's going to take you out. Ahithophel goes and kills himself. The question is, why in the world would Ahithophel jump ship after being with David all these years? Why would he jump ship? Any ideas? 2 Samuel, it says who his dad was, or who his son was. Ariel, I think his name is something like that. That's our guide. It can't be Ariel. That's our tour guide. Isn't that something in my head? Eliam, not Ariel. Eliam, or Eliam, is his son. Isn't that something? Eliam had a little girl. They had a big wedding for her. She got married. Awesome family. Awesome marriage. Awesome marriage. Big deal. Her husband went off to war. He got killed in war. The king married her. Her name was Bathsheba. Ahithophel's Bathsheba's grandpa. David's main counselor is Bathsheba's grandpa. He was a counselor before all this, but he also saw all this. I'm just saying, could it be? As time went on, he goes, enough's enough. I don't know. But it's the type of stuff you'll find as you read through the details of the genealogies, mind you. So when it says Bathsheba was the son of Eliam, write that down. And then you read in Ithiel, Ithiel had a son, his name was Eliam? What? So it's really fun, guys. Studying the Old Testament is so much fun, and it's addictive. Because you get to be like the writer of this play that's going on in your head as you're reading the Old Testament. And you can say, I got to put this over here, and I'm going to put this over here, and this is really cool over here. And I'm here to tell you, if you get into this, you will spend sometimes 10 hours just in a genealogy, tracing down this genealogy, going, oh, and this goes over here, and then I wonder what this word means. What? Oh, you got to be kidding me. And this is over here, and oh man. And the Old Testament just comes alive. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. So read Joshua and Judges and Ruth and 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel. Just read them. Got a married couple here? Read them. Read them together. Just take time. You guys are both retired, right? So you've probably got no time. But those of you that are working, they have more time. Because I know what that retirement's like. It's crazy. I'm watching. It's like, what? But, okay, you guys don't. You have a lot of time. So spend time reading. Just read together. And just read. Like, read 3 chapters to Grace, and Grace, read 3 chapters to Don. That's 6 chapters. In a month, you've read almost all of it. And just have fun. Have notepads. Just write down little things. And after you're done reading it, and throughout the day, you go back, what's this? Oh, this is cool. Oh, this is cool. Do it. If you're single, oh man, read like everything. You got all kinds of time. Just read. Take your Bible to bed with you and start reading. Have a little notepad and just start writing these things down. You'd be surprised. I would encourage you, if you ever get a chance, read a book in one setting. The first time I did it was the book of Numbers. And I still have my notes. I think I still have my notes. I saw them not a couple years ago. They probably still do. My notes I took the first time I sat down in one setting and said, God, just teach me. And I read the book of Numbers. This was back in orange chair right there. It would have been 1983. And I just wrote down chapter 1, and this is what I saw. Chapter 2, this is what I saw. And I didn't get up except, I think, one bathroom break. And I just read the book of Numbers and jotted down Numbers. I never saw Numbers the same again. And I realized the importance of reading a book in one setting. So if you have the time to do it, it takes about an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours. You don't have to read it slow, just read it. And just jot down little notes and keep reading. Get the flow of the book. Unbelievable things God will show you. So have fun, okay? That's all. No homework, no worksheet. Merry Christmas. We'll see you the next time we get together. Anybody know when we come back?
10th?
Thursday.
Not 17th. 10th. Calm yourself. The 10th.
You said something a couple weeks ago, though, that you wanted us to do during the break.
Nope, nothing. Just read. Just read it. I'm going to give you time off.